Alright, so let's go back before we move forward with today's lesson. Let's go back and talk a little bit about what we did the last few days in class. And so, last few days in class, we talked about some different groups in America, okay, at the start and during World War II. So, what are some different groups that we talked about that contributed to the war effort? What are some groups that you covered in your groups on Friday? We had African Americans.
Japanese.
We had Japanese Americans. We had women. And one more group we talked about. Okay, Hispanic Americans, Mexican Americans. Okay, so each of these had a significant part during the war. And so your job on Friday, going back to Friday, you all were in pairs and you came up with a propaganda poster of a type to represent each of their roles during the war. So I've chosen 3 posters from the class here. This one here is Jake. If you come up, I'll let you talk a little bit about this. Livy and Lucas, I just kind of put y'all's posters together. Y'all just come stand on this side and just kind of, I'm just going to ask you a few questions. Just share, you don't have to do anything. No, it doesn't have to be long and drawn out. Just very informal here. Just going to talk a little bit about, and some of you in class may have something to add. Well, let me rephrase that. I know you have something to add because you all did pretty high quality work on Friday. So as I talk, you have something to add to it with a women or African American, or maybe you did a Hispanic role. Let's share those, okay? Because you have some really, really good things that you came up with on Friday. So we'll let Lucas, you go ahead and go first, and I'll kind of tie those together. Go ahead.
All right, well, during the war, women were very important contribution towards the war because at this time, whatever, 30% of America's workforce during the war was women because there were so many needed jobs because all the men were gone to fight. And so, and this one right here, like it said, you can find your job in industry, agriculture, or business, and basically they were willing to work, do any kind of job, whatever. And in fact, without them, we might have a different outcome of the war. And like right here, they were supporting of the growing for the gardens for them and sent out the food and stuff. And at this time, over 20 million gardens were planted. And I mean, that's why I kind of chose them because they're they're from anything on the war fronts to at home, whatever they did, that kind of actually helped us the most during the war, I think. And so that's why I chose it. And then over 37,000 were killed in different factory type works because just trying to help the war.
To me, the most interesting fact there is 37,000 women died in a factory. Okay, how do you think people were killed in a factory? How would these women maybe be killed in a factory setting? What kind of jobs do women have? What kind of jobs they do? I know y'all know these, so we talked about them. What type specific? What were they doing?
Building tanks.
We're making cars.
Okay, they were making automobiles, not necessarily automobiles, but for the most part, these automobile manufacturers, they turned these massive plants that were one time making cars into making what? Tanks and airplanes, okay? So to put a tank together, what's one of the most important jobs? And some of y'all do this in ag, and maybe some people go to trade school to learn this. What was the most important part about putting a tank together? There's 2 important jobs that's very necessary to build a tank. Welding, okay? So you imagine you're under this humongous piece of steel welding, and it falls off the chain. Okay, or you're inside, you're running a rivet gun, maybe the compressor explodes, whatever. There were some dangerous jobs. You're up on these high scaffolds working, so there's a lot of dangerous jobs. I'll share one thing with you, and I want somebody else that had the group of women to share something. But a unique job that I read about one time women having, because you said, it wouldn't make sense to take a small factory that maybe was producing like canned food before the war and make tanks, right? Why did they make the automobile factories making airplanes and tanks? Why?
Because I had more room.
They already had the room, they had the machines, so they made these factories into something that was easy to transition to. So these women, I thought it was interesting that they took this cosmetic factory that was making lipstick and pantyhose and makeup, stuff like that. They were making bullets, okay, because it was small, there was no small that they can make. And so one night, these ladies were all working in this room, and they were making these tracer bullets. And it has this little lock of like some kind of combustible gas. You ever seen them shooting in a movie or on TV where they're shooting at night? You can see the red lasers going through the sky. They have these little things that when they come out of the end of the barrel, they ignite, and you can, you don't need to look down the gun to aim. You can just follow the tracer bullets. And so, well, these things were highly combustible. One night, there was coming this huge lightning storm, and they called all the ladies, "Hey, get out of the building right now," because the static electricity could make it blow up. Well, somebody knocked over the explosives, and these ladies had to crawl on their hands and knees because if one of them stepped on it, the whole building would have blew up. And I thought, you think about the tanks and the planes, but you don't think about the women making little, small things, okay, like that. Bullets were pretty important during the war, right? So if somebody else had women, what did y'all have something different? Y'all have anything different on y'all's poster? The ad? What direction did y'all go with y'all's poster?
We just we just said like it was a good time for women because they didn't have to work in the house anymore. That they could go out and get their own job and make money.
Yeah.
They probably already want a job anyways. So.
And then now they could do it.
I mean, think about it. I mean, ladies in here, y'all no different than women back then. How would you like to be cooped up in the house all the time?
Definitely not. That's fine.
And all you did was got the kids off to school, you cleaned, you cooked, you only had money if your husband gave it to you. So when the war was over and you had all this money, did you want to surrender that? No. We all like money, okay? So they didn't want to surrender that. And I've tied Libby's poster here too because not only were women working in the factories, but I like it too because I can't draw and I like your drawing there. So that was a really good drawing there. Just anything you want to tell them about just why you chose that or what you found out about that?
Those are the women from the WAFS unit. They took the place of the men who were in the Air Force because they needed the men on the front lines. And they were very skeptical about putting women there, but they did anyways, and they turned out to be a lot better than men.
And they flew like protection around America, right? They were like over the United States. Of course, you're talking about women in the Air Force. What was another group that we go right into? Tuskegee Airmen, right here in Alabama, Tuskegee College, the historical black college. We talked about it a few chapters ago, how they learned trades and stuff there. And so, tell me a little bit about your poster, talking about putting African Americans in planes.
I had African Americans, and before the war, African Americans were basically, I want to say homeless. They were very segregated, couldn't get jobs, couldn't even go to the same places and breathe the same air as whites. And when the war started, they needed those men on the front line, so they decided they were going to have to work with them. And people in the military started to realize that they're the same and they can do the same things we can. So after the war, they were still segregated, but they started to fight more for their rights. And that's when that movement took place. And people just started to realize that some were realizing that they're equal and some, were still racist. But that's when that took place.
So looking back in history, it's not that long ago. So are there still stems of racism in society today? Yeah, okay. So that's another topic we talk about, but segregation started in the 1950s, or desegregation in the military. Dwight Eisenhower desegregated the military, but it was not until like 1964, 65 that desegregation started to take place in society, okay? Little thing about the Tuskegee Airmen, they were known for the red tails that were painted on their P-59 Mustangs, their fighter jets, and what they did, they escorted bombers that were going from Italy to Germany bombing. So one time, a little story about them, they're going and they're flying with these bombers, and all of a sudden these German fighters show up. Well, everybody, these bombers, just big old lumbering jets like you see over here on the poster, or aircraft that wasn't very fast. They didn't maneuver very well. So it was important for those fighter jets to stay locked in formation right beside them. And all these other planes, they would leave and go chase these German planes and leave these vulnerable. Okay, so all of a sudden, one mission, they had these planes that had these red tails. They never flew with them before. They didn't know anything about the pilots. So when the bombers came back, they went and requested the air marshal, said, look, every time we fly, we want those pilots with the red tails painted. And the guy looked at him and said, those were African American pilots, right? He said, I don't care if they're green, yellow, blue, them boys protected us all the way in and all the way back. So that's where they get their fame sort of starting there, okay? So good job, y'all have a seat. Y'all did a really good job on these posters. So now to rehash, same thing we just kind of talked about. You got a few questions on Quiz Is. So most of you have already joined. If you want to take it in a few minutes, let's go ahead and log in that Quiz Is and get started. Okay, and then we'll review those questions. So you got 3 3-4 minutes right here.